2026 is a huge year for the Armagh footballers, in my opinion. A massive, massive year. Looking back at 2025 for Armagh, I think there will be regrets, disappointment, frustrations, especially with how it ended up versus Kerry. I mean, we all expected, maybe other than the most loyal Kerry fans, even Kerry fans themselves, couldn't have foreseen what happened with Armagh in that game. But look, it was an awful game in the end for Armagh football, for them to have been beaten the way that they were versus Kerry and to have been absolutely blown away from pillar to post. It was embarrassing in many ways, in some respects, from an Armagh point of view. But ultimately, like, when we look back at the year, look, they weren't a million miles off, you would have to say. I mean, getting to the Ulster final, competing the way that they were, playing the way that they did, they were very unlucky not to have come through that. They stayed up in Division 1. They got some big wins in the championship as well, beating Dublin at Croke Park, beating Derry. The defeat to Galway was a little bit disappointing, but that was obviously a game that was effectively a dead rubber for them. But next year is huge for Armagh football, in my opinion, because look, I think when you look through Armagh history, they've had what you would say is two iconic football teams that can win All Irelands. One of them we're looking at right now. The other team was obviously back in the 2000s. The team in the 2000s won an All Ireland in 2002 and couldn't quite get over the line again. They came close a couple of times in 03. Obviously, 2004 was a massive setback with the defeat of Fermanagh. But once that team kind of dissembled away, like, Armagh football fell off the boil massively, didn't they? And they were in Division 3 as recently as 2019. So I think for Armagh football, like, they haven't always been at the top table. Do you know that way? Like, I think when you look at Dublin and Kerry, they're kind of always thereabouts. Galway come and go, Mayo come and go, albeit, look, they have won All Ireland in Donkey's years, but they're always kind of thereabouts in terms of competing, in terms of being a consistent Division 1 team. Whereas Armagh haven't always been that. Tyrone have probably been that a lot more over the last kind of 20 years or so. But Armagh haven't always been that. And look, that might change maybe with underage players and with the right structures in place that brought through this current Armagh team. Maybe they can kick on a little bit more. And to be fair, there has been some young lads that have come through the team in recent years, like Oisín Connaughty, who've been obviously phenomenal and been brilliant for this Armagh side. But I think where I'm getting at is this isn't a guarantee for Armagh that they're going to be here for the next 5, 6, 7 years. And ultimately, look, there are a lot of players that are getting on a bit. The likes of Aidan Forker, the likes of Rory Grugan, and the likes of Stephen Campbell. There's a lot of players in there over the next sort of 4 or 5 years could potentially step away. And I think that's why they have to cash in and be successful again now. You know what I mean? Because I think the potential is there for Armagh to go and win another All-Ireland, to win an Ulster title, as difficult as it may be. Question marks over Rian O'Neill. He was obviously had a couple of personal issues this year and was in and out of the team. I think you need to hopefully get him, hopefully he can get him back in the side on a consistent basis for next year, because I think he is one of the best in the country. And if you get a bit more game time behind his belt going into the championship next year, that could be absolutely huge. And look, Armagh's always been a team as well that have a lot of players that I think can get scouted by the AFL as well. We saw Charlie Oak-Burns very close to potentially going there. A few other players could very well, be in the mix as well. So, Armagh is a team where players could get kind of dragged away. And it is interesting with Armagh because they haven't really had a huge amount of underage success in recent years, despite Kieran McGeeney being able to bring through a couple of young lads, which is testament to his eye for talent. But there hasn't been a huge amount of players kind of really coming through the team, coming through the under-20s and everything else. And maybe that is a little bit worrying from an Armagh perspective. But it's huge. It's absolutely huge for them to really sort of make do with these players that they have, because absolutely they can challenge for an All-Ireland next year, in my opinion. They absolutely can. They have the players from 1 to 15, and a phenomenal goalkeeper in Ethan Rafferty, brilliant defenders in the likes of Aidan Forker, Barry McCambridge, Paddy Byrne, some phenomenal players at the back. You're looking then into the forwards, and you have Rian O'Neill, who can also sort of drift in and around midfield and play in around there as well. And then the attacking talent that they have in Oisín Connaughty and Conor Turbett, Rory Grugan, Stephen Campbell. They've got some phenomenal players in that side that can really do damage and sort of cause a lot of problems. And look, having got over the line in 2024, look, maybe some would say for Armagh football, that's a good enough achievement in itself. But they have the talent, they have the players there, in my opinion, to make a stab at another All-Ireland, to make a stab at winning an Ulster title and actually going and doing it. And that's why I think next year is huge, because if next year goes wrong, like if next year they don't win an Ulster title and maybe they lose in another All-Ireland quarter-final, I genuinely could see players step away. Look, Kieran McGeeney has been our man manager for a long time now as well. So, like, he could, and he's won the All-Ireland. He's got the team over the line. If next year was to go a little bit south, he could look at it and think, do you know what? I've taken this team as far as they can go. It's time for me to leave. And maybe then you get an Ushie McConville in or something like that. But I think there's a chance here for this Armagh team to really build something. And I think if they can get it right next year, if they can stay in the mix, if they can get to a final, they don't necessarily have to win it. But if they can come close, I think they have a chance. I really do at sort of building a bit of a dynasty. And I think, look, obviously they were caught cold versus Kerry in that quarter-final. Did they fall into the media narrative a little bit? They were a little bit naive going into that game. I think had seen that version of Kerry play, say if it was Kerry Tyrone and then Kerry Armagh, I think Armagh would have been a lot better in that game. They would have been a lot more prepared. They would have been a lot more up for it. I think maybe they were a little bit caught in that game. And I think they were flustered, weren't they? Obviously in that sort of third quarter where Kerry just absolutely decimated them and blew them away. But look, physically, they have the team that can compete with Kerry. There's no doubt about it. I actually think, like, if I was to rank it going into next year, look, Kerry are their favourites again. There's no question. But I actually think Armagh are more likely to topple them than Donegal, in my opinion. I just think Armagh have a little bit more about them. Haven't done it previously as well in 2024, beating them in the semi-finals. But it will be contingent on, keeping a lot of those players within the panel, getting massive game time, I think, for Rian O'Neill, and backing themselves. And look, the Ulster title will be the big one, really, because they haven't won that in a long time. And that will obviously be a huge sort of aspiration for this Armagh team. But that has to be a big focus. It has to be a big focus winning Ulster. But they can compete. And they can beat Kerry, in my opinion. They can beat Donegal. They can beat Tyrone. They've proven that, over the last couple of years. Obviously, they've lost a couple of Ulster finals with Donegal, but they've been by the smallest of margins, extra time, penalties, that kind of thing. So, yeah, an absolute massive year for the Armagh footballers. Let me know in the comments down below what you think for Armagh football going into 2026. A huge year for the Yorkshire County. And I think if they can get it right, they could really be onto something. They could build a platform for the next couple of years. Look, they got over the line. They did what they had an incredible achievement in 2024. But I think for Armagh, they haven't always been a team consistently at the top. And I think if they can get it right next year, they have the potential to kick on. But if it goes a little bit wrong, then I think players could leave the team. And, they're at a bit of a crossroads in terms of whether they're going to stay up here or whether they're going to drop down a little bit more over the next couple of years. So that's going to be very interesting to see. Another player who I didn't mention as well is Keane McConville, who's really been sort of knocking on the door over the last couple of years as well. So he could be a player maybe that could come into the side on a more consistent basis next year. So, look, we'll wrap that up here. Cheers, anyone who tuned in. Hit the like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about Armagh football going into 2026. Can they win Sam again? Can this Armagh team ultimately, top the team of the 2000s and become what would be the greatest Armagh football team of all time? Let me know. And we'll catch you all later.